Ladies and gentlemen, take your seats if you will, please. I'd like to call this meeting to order. This is a two-part meeting, just in case other members of the council show up, sufficient to have a quorum. It's a called meeting for the Delta Stewardship Council, but it is in fact a scoping meeting for the environmental impact process that we are engaged in pursuant to the statutory mandate to develop, adopt, and begin implementation of a Delta plan on January 1st, 2012, which we will do. A couple of things out on the table should be copies of the governance legislation passed last year. At least half of this crowd looks to me like people who were involved in the drafting of the legislation, so you probably don't need extra copies, but for anybody else, this is the governance bill that is guiding our activities and the activities of other state agencies in this regard. Number two, you'll hear shortly from Mr. Grindstaff on the scoping activity, but you probably have seen our reports on our schedule. It is a tight time schedule, but on February 14th of this year, we anticipate the first staff draft of the Delta plan will become available, and that will be heard for the first time at the council meeting of February. In March, April, and May of this year, we will move to a 4-day-a-month meeting schedule, 2 days in the first 2 weeks, 2 days in the second 2 weeks, and that is to accommodate what will follow, which are essentially 4 drafts of a draft Delta plan. The draft Delta plan will be adopted by the council in May. Joe, correct me if I'm wrong. And then there will be a hiatus for public comment under environmental law. And then starting once again in September, October, and November, we will have 3 additional drafts of the Delta plan itself. The council will act and approve the Delta plan in November of 2011, which gives us 45 days, I think the requirement is, for the Office of Administrative Law to review and analyze that proposal. All that is necessary in order to meet the statutory mandate of a Delta plan up, running, and enforceable by January 1st, 2012. So what we've started here is this is the 4th of 7 statewide scoping meetings to hear public comments on the scope of the environmental impact report, suggestions you'd like to see discussed in the environmental impact report, any other things you'd like to say to us. We have met in Diamond Bar in Southern California last week. We met in Merced. We met in Concord, Sacramento, and we have meetings coming up in Stockton and Chico this week. In addition, on Thursday and Friday, the council will be meeting in full session for our regular order of business. So what we'd like to do is start off with Mr. Grindstaff's summary of the status, and then we're simply going to call upon you to present what testimony you have. This is primarily a scoping session, as you know, which means it's a listening session for us and primarily an opportunity for you to talk. Mr. Grindstaff, our Executive Director.
Thank you very much. Can everybody hear me? Very good, very good. You've already met Chair Eisenberg, and you know me. Terry, would you raise your hands and raise your hand? You don't have to raise both of them. And, okay. And there are various other people here, and I think most of you already know them. If you have any questions, Eric Alvarez is standing up over here, and he'll be glad to help you as we move through the process today and any time in the future. As you understand, our purpose is to have a scoping meeting about the Delta plan to actually get input. We have a notice of preparation, and we have included in that a number of strategies, a number of things that might be included in a Delta plan, and what we want today is to hear from you about what should be included, what we've missed, what you like that we've done, what you don't like that we've done, just because the scoping document is just that. It's kind of a whole, it lists a range of ideas of things that could ultimately be in the Delta plan. At the end of the meeting, for those that want to talk about things that aren't part of the scoping document of the notice of preparation, we'll also have just plain public comment for people to make those comments. The Delta plan is based on this key language from the statute. We often talk about the co-equal goals, and there is a definition in statute about the co-equal goals for the Delta. The co-equal goals means water supply improving and providing a more reliable water supply, restoring and enhancing the Delta's ecosystem, and doing it in a way that protects and enhances the unique values of the Delta as an evolving place. It was much fought over language, but very important and is key to what the council does as we move ahead. And one of the things that's interesting about the Delta Plan is that so much of it is governed by statute. So understand the council, in my experience, refers to the statute every meeting, multiple times during every meeting, making sure that we're trying to follow what the statute says. Now, the program objectives are actually called out in law. So we know not only the co-equal goals, but a number of the key program objectives. So that's what we intend to follow. The planning area includes most of the state. It includes the Delta itself as the primary planning area, and the secondary planning area includes the watershed and the export area. I think our consultant told us that that included 96% of the state's population. So it's a significant planning area, but it's probably impossible to really meet the objectives of the law if we don't at least consider those areas as part of the scope of the Delta Plan. Study period, again, governed to a large extent by the law. The law actually mentions 2100 in at least one place in the law, so the decision was that the study period, in order to be consistent with the law, should go to 2100. That means from January 1, 2012 through 2100, I guess that's 88 years. That's a very long planning period, and so I think right now we're talking about, yes, we have the long planning period, but we need to break it up into smaller segments so that we actually can have some objectives that make sense short-term and medium-term before we ever get to that really long-term objective. One of the other key things I want to mention is BDCP. Probably many people in this room have worked on BDCP. The legislation has very specific requirements and says that BDCP will be included in the Delta Plan if it meets certain standards. The director of the Department of Fish and Game certifies as to whether the BDCP has met those standards, and then anyone may appeal that to the council. So it kind of gives the council a little bit of a different role in this, but it is what the legislation, again, requires. So BDCP is an important part of this. BDCP will not likely be done by the time the Delta Plan is done. The legislation gave the council the ability to update the Delta Plan at any time and requires that it be reviewed at least every 5 years. So my expectation is that as BDCP and potentially other plans come along, they may require the council to update the Delta Plan. We have been having scoping meetings for the last week and for this week, and it's been a rather busy schedule. We've been in Southern California. We're spending some time in the Delta now. Tonight's Clarksburg, tomorrow night Stockton, and then we're going up to Chico, I think, on Wednesday night, and that will conclude the scoping meetings. The period for public comments on scoping ends the 28th of January. However, I do want to point out that the process that the chairman referred to is going to be a very open process. So the plan is we complete scoping by the end of this month, but we actually start the process for having draft documents out there that are publicly reviewed and where the council takes comments and makes decisions, and we get new drafts. And so our anticipation is that we'll have one draft per month for the next, from February, March, April, and May, and that the council then will adopt a draft at the end of May that becomes the public draft along with the EIR that gets circulated for official public comment. So assume that it goes out for 45 days, I think is what the law says, 45 days or whatever that timeline is. Then it comes back, and based on all of those comments, we expect there will be another draft Delta plan, probably in September, and we're expecting that we will have a couple more after the council gives direction, after, again, receiving all of those comments and having discussions about it. So there will be many, many opportunities for each of you to weigh in on the Delta plan along the way, in addition to today's meeting. Here's kind of how that schedule all looks. We end up with an adoption of the Delta plan by November. The Delta plan then goes to the Office of Administrative Law. It does become a regulation. It is an enforceable document on all state and local agencies. So it is something that we expect will be in effect in January of 2012. I should mention that we actually have a court reporter here. So when you come up, please make sure that on the blue sheet, which you've all, hopefully those of you that wish to comment have filled out a blue sheet, holding up a blue sheet so you can see that. Hopefully you have printed legibly. Phil always reminds me of that. He claims his handwriting is bad, but mine's much worse. So that is important. And please, it would be helpful if you help the court reporter by stating your name clearly and who you're affiliated with as we move ahead. We will also accept written comments. You can hand in written comments today. You can mail them to the address that we have here. You can email them. All of those things are acceptable, and we'll be glad to take those comments. In fact, we would like to have comments on scoping as we move ahead. So, with that, at the end of the meeting, after we're finished with all of this, we'll come to regular public comment that's not about scoping for the Delta plan. So with that, I'll go back and we'll let the chair take over. And I always like to leave this, the co-equal goals up on the screen. Thank you.
The other thing to mention is that this is being tape recorded, and the tape of this meeting will be posted within 24 hours on our website, as with all the other scoping meetings. In addition, the court reporter is taking everything down, and if you'll note, we will post the slides that Mr. Grindstaff used. A couple of people said they might or might not use slides. If you're using slides, we'll post those too, just to provide for the public record. Okay, I have a bunch of requests here, and Mr. Alvarez is standing up front, and he will collect those and bring them to me if you would. But the first individual who wished to talk is Mr. Woodling from the Sacramento Regional Water Authority. Mr. Woodling, good to see you, sir.
Good morning.
Morning, sir.
I guess we aren't going in alphabetical order. I get to go first. John Woodling. I'm with the Regional Water Authority. I'm executive director. In that capacity, I represent 21 water suppliers serving a little under 2 million people in the greater Sacramento area. I want to thank Chair Eisenberg and staff for the opportunity to comment today. I appreciate the formidable task that they face over the coming year and recognize the significant effort already put forth. We will provide comments by letter, but I wanted to cover a few points today. In the 2009 Delta Reform Act, the legislature stressed the need for increased self-reliance throughout the state, regional self-reliance. And the Sacramento Valley and the Sacramento metropolitan area represent really one of the few areas of the state that is self-reliant now, not depending on imported water from other hydrologic regions, not depending on overdraft of its groundwater resources like so much of the state. So we want to make sure that the Stewardship Council and its EIR fully addresses and analyzes the extent to which that ability to rely on those local and regional water resources may be impacted by any actions to restore the delta. Similarly, we want to ensure that any proposals don't violate the state's area of origin, water laws, or the water rights priority system. Second point, we believe that the NOP suggests a level of authority that wasn't granted to the Stewardship Council in the legislation, and maybe suggests some alternatives that may undermine and impinge on the authorities and rights of local agencies and other state agencies to do their job. A good example of this is the suggestion that the EIR will consider conservation measures beyond the SBX 77, 20% by 2020. That was a key piece of the legislation that was negotiated, and I think the Stewardship Council, rather than DWR as identified in the law, figuring out what the next steps are when we get to 2015 would undermine some of that authority and undermine the efforts of a lot of water suppliers. Well, I understand the focus has to be on a large part of the state because everything is connected. I want to urge the Stewardship Council to maintain a laser-sharp focus on the Delta to the extent it can. I think that's the only way you can overcome one of the key problems with the Bay Delta Authority and the CalFed program, trying to do too much, trying to solve all the state's water problems. And then finally, I wish you all luck in this challenge, and we stand ready to participate with you and with other water users in the state to solve the problems of the Delta. Thank you.
Mr. Woodling, just one question. Do you have a quantification of the water rights your clients claim that exist for them, or could you provide that?
I could find that out. I don't have that handy. It's water rights.
If you would, that would be helpful.
It's contracts with the CVP. It's a variety of water sources for the members.
It would be helpful if you could break it down by categories of your members and total acre feet and so on, because one of the things we face is, of course, the rivers that run through here are not only regional rivers, they are also statewide rivers and streams, and it's hard to figure it out. Everyone asserts a claim, but I'm kind of interested in quantification.
Yeah, we can absolutely do that, and,
Great.
And those tend to be senior water rights, senior to the rights of the state and federal project.
Got it. Thank you very much. Okay, Mr. Joel Carey. Mr. Carey. Pardon? You're declining, Mr. Carey. This is the first time in many years that you have declined to speak, Mr. Carey. Hold on just a minute. Why? I should probably haul you up and ask you why, but I won't. Thank you very much. Because I have your email address. By the way, we strongly encourage anyone who talks here today to also send us their thoughts in writing and in great detail. Mr. Carey alluded to that. One of the things we do is we post communications on the website. You're free to look at everybody's communication that's up there. We're probably over 1,000 or more by now. And it is very helpful to get your comments in writing as we do this stuff, things you might not have said here that you had forgotten. Okay, Mr. Pace, City of Sacramento Community Development Department. Mr. Pace.
Good morning. Thank you for this opportunity to address you. Primarily, I'm here to speak about the relationship of the Delta Stewardship Council with the local land use authorities of the City of Sacramento in particular. Other cities may share similar concerns. We recently adopted our 2030 general plan at the beginning of 2009, and it is an effort to implement the state's goals related to AB 32 and SB 375. And we want to make sure that we are able to implement our general plan, and we're not clear on how the consistency findings process will work, and we would encourage the council to set up a process that would facilitate smart growth, infill development, higher density, mixed use development around transit stations and within urban areas that doesn't pose any difficulties for infill development, which already faces many challenges through a variety of other regulatory processes, lack of infrastructure, and other issues. And so, while we certainly appreciate the need to look at and scrutinize extension of urbanization into farmland and into endangered species areas, we hope that we don't have a blanket set of regulations that poses difficulties for urban development in urban areas. So I'll just keep it at that, and we'll see if we can follow up with more detailed written comments.
Okay, we'd appreciate that very
Thank you.
much. Thank you, sir. The next speaker, Kathy Mannion, Regional Council of Rural Counties. Where are you? Oh, there you are. Okay.
Kathy Mannion, Regional Council of Rural Counties. Appreciate the opportunity to address you today. We have submitted written comments, preliminary comments. I won't go over them in detail, but I do want to touch upon some key points, and then we also may submit some additional comments. The first comment deals with the secondary planning area. The NOP specifically states and points to certain code sections as a reason as to why the Act requires the Stewardship Council to take certain actions. As I've pointed out in our comments, two code sections in particular, and that would be Section 85302B and 85307A, both use the term may, so it is permissive. So essentially, I think the NOP is incorrect in stating, in pointing to those particular sections, that the council is required to do those certain things. Now, there are two code sections that use the term shall promote, and those code sections deal with the promote statewide water conservation, water use efficiency, and sustainable use of water, as well as promoting options for new and improved infrastructure relating to water conveyance in the Delta storage systems and for the operation of both to achieve the co-equal goals. And in looking at that language and considering what the members of the legislature might have thought that promote meant, we really question whether the scope of the various requirements and potential recommendations in the NOP is what the legislature intended as far as new requirements and mandates. And throughout the comment letter, I do point to various portions of the floor analyses as to what was intended. And I would mention, again, talking about the scope of the planning area, that the Assembly Senate third reading analysis specifically mentioned the criticisms that had been made in regards to CalFed for the breadth of the problem area and its even broader solution area. And the analysis went on to say that this bill will restore the spotlight to the legal delta and the Suisun Marsh as an estuary system. Another area that deals with the legally enforceable. Now, I noticed that the NOP stated that the EIR does not limit the applicability of the provisions of the Act that designate the Delta Plan as a legally enforceable document. And as I point out in our comments, the term legally enforceable is mentioned once in the Act, and that is in the findings and the declarations, where it states let me see here.
I'll read it to you. By
Yeah.
enacting this division, it's intended the legislature to provide for the sustainable
Yes.
management of the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta ecosystem, to provide for more reliable water supply for the state, to protect and enhance the quality of water supply from the Delta, and to establish a governance structure that will direct efforts across state agencies to develop a legally enforceable Delta plan.
Correct, thank
Yeah.
you. And so what we believe is that when you read the legislative intent in combination with the other provisions of the Act, that a legally enforceable Delta plan is to be developed utilizing the legal authority vested in the various state agencies that would be responsible for implementation of the Delta plan. So the comment...
So the Delta plan itself is not enforceable, but the actions of the agency responding to it might be.
Essentially, we believe that it was the intent of the legislature that the Delta plan that is developed, and I do have some additional verbiage here, would be enforced by the various state agencies that have the enforcement authority. In fact, we do have a comment in the Senate third reading analysis that, and this is relating to various provisions that are under the authority of the various agencies, that the provisions were to preserve the regulatory authority generally of these agencies in order to clarify that the new Delta Stewardship Council is not a super regulatory agency that trumps other regulatory agencies. Another issue deals with governance, and the NOP cites certain portions of the Act, but does not include others, and I have listed those in our comments. And I guess I would generally say that it appears to us that the legislature has laid out in the Act the governance structure. And in fact, the analysis, floor analysis states, this bill replaces the existing Bay Delta Authority and the CalFed program with a new governance structure designed to balance the needs of the environment, water users, and Delta communities. And it goes on to talk about the various provisions that provide for that governance. So when viewing the NOP and noting that it says that they would consider organization changes for management of state water resources, we believe that that is beyond the scope of the Delta Stewardship Council. In the area of cost, we know that a finance plan will be developed, and we'll comment on that when it's available. But we would ask that the council consider the cost of implementation, that is the affordability and cost benefit, before including recommendations in the Delta plan. And so I think that's the highlights of our comments, and again, we'll submit some additional comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Brenninger, Placer County Water Agency and the Recreational Boaters of California, not all of whom boat just in Placer County.
Good morning.
Morning.
It's like a big kumbaya here today. Reminds me of the meetings you have at the City Hall in West Sacramento. Dave Brenninger, here for two groups, Placer County Water Agency. Just briefly, let me first introduce our chairman, Lowell Jarvis. Also one of our attorneys, Janet Goldsmith. We'll be submitting our concerns and interests through John Woodling and the Regional Water Authority, and possibly with some other organizations as well. Then also just kind of shifting my hat for the moment, as a recreator in the Delta, really become to appreciate the sense of place. I've been very active with the California Delta Chamber of Commerce and representing recreational boaters of California. Also here today is the executive director of the Delta Chamber, Bill Wells. Bill? I think he's also going to be at your Clarksburg meeting later on. And they have some genuine interests that I would just say, as kind of a citizen of the state, need to be sensitive to and be involved with. Lastly, for RBOC, our continuing interest is if the waterways of the waters of California or of the United States are changed in some way with barriers, we'd like to see boat locks put in those locations. We're understanding the technology is beginning to change. They're thinking more about bubblers along the way and lights and sound effects, and that may be very helpful, and that may not impact boating, don't know, but I'm glad to see Department of Water Resources and the Bureau of Reclamation are looking at other ways to possibly help protect the sensitive fish from the predator fish. So we'll be submitting on behalf of RBOC a written response as well. And also we'll work with John on that quantifying the water that you asked for through the RWA members.
Great.
We'll do that for those interests in Placer County. Thank you.
Sir, thank you very much.
Okay.
All right. Anybody else filled out blue forms, Mr. Alvarez? No. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to come up next, I'll just call on you. But after you get through talking, we'll ask you to fill out a blue form, printing your name carefully so the court reporter can check it and get the spelling and organizational affiliation correct. Is there anyone else who wishes to talk to us? Yes, sir. If you'd come forward and give your name and organization, if you're representing an organization.
My name is Richard Murat. I'm representing myself.
Yes, sir.
I was looking at Figure 1, and I'm confused why the estuary downstream of Suisun Marsh is not painted red on scope. That's my comment.
Why it's not painted red.
It's outside the scope of the EIR.
It's Ms. Grindstaff, you want to address that?
Actually, I think it's a good question, and I don't have a good answer. I'm sorry to say.
Yeah, the Suisun Marsh, as you know, is not part of the statutory delta designated by the legislature in the 1950s, but for purposes of this statute, it was included within the definition of the delta for development of the delta plan.
I understand.
I mean, I could make a case that it should actually be painted red because actions that occur in the bay do impact the fish of the delta, and as much in some cases as actions upstream do. And so,
Thank you.
Yeah. Also, another thing that's worth noting, the statute refers to this as an estuary a couple of times, and that is a concept that links the delta, the historic and the statutory delta and the Suisun Marsh to the bay, at least in terminology. Thank you very much, sir. Okay, who's next? Well, I'm not going to force you to come up and testify, but there are about 60 of you in the audience, and it's hard for me to imagine that some of you don't have anything to say. Okay. Let's see. Mr. Stevens, when you have 60 people sitting there looking at each other, pretending that they're not going to be the next ones to stand up, how many times should I pursue this discussion before saying, if you don't want to say anything, we're done? Yeah, we'll talk about football. That's a good idea. Thank you. That's a wonderful legal suggestion. I will incorporate that. All right. Is there anyone who would like to give comments generally, as opposed to scoping comments on the notice of preparation, which was available outside the door and posted on our website, and the process we've been talking about? Anyone like to speak generally on that? I'll just add an observation. Joe tells me I shouldn't make observations, but I will. This is not an uncommon reaction in the 4 meetings we've had, and it's because there are, generally speaking, in public policy, 2 states of opinion. The first state of opinion is, tell me what you're going to do to me, and then I'll tell you what you're doing wrong. Which means I'll wait till you tell me what you're going to do, and then I'm going to hit you with a 75-page letter. And then if that approach is taken, if we didn't have scoping meetings now, the next reaction is, why didn't you ask me first before you decided what to do? And I think all of us kind of in our personal lives harbor both attitudes simultaneously. The first staff draft will be available on February 14th, and there will be 6 iterations to follow, minimum of 6 iterations to follow in the remainder of this year. Last shot, ladies and gentlemen. Anyone like to say anything, ask any questions, make any observations, talk about football, sing, or otherwise participate? Yes, please, come forward. Mr. Alvarez, you're going to get the speakers who didn't fill out the blue form to fill it out after. Okay, got it. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, my name is Kathy Barnes-Jones. I'm here representing Solano County. I thank you for the opportunity to speak. One of the things that we're most concerned with this process is impacts of habitat restoration to Solano County. A lot of the state's activities have started in the early 2000s. We have been more aware of this since 2007, and we really haven't had the opportunity to assemble the staff or with the technical expertise to make sure that the impacts will not be detrimental to our communities. So I have to say I'm very appreciative of your staff's willingness to work with us, to meet with us, to talk through some of those issues on behalf of Solano County and as part of the Delta Counties Coalition. We'll be submitting more specific comments later, but we appreciate that opportunity and we feel it's important so that we have an opportunity to identify problems and then work together to try to find ways that will benefit or be mutually beneficial for us and for the state.
Thank you, Ms. Barnes-Jones. Okay, is there anyone else who would like to comment? Going once? Yes, sir. I'm sorry. Right there we are. Aqua's coming up. All right.
Good morning, Mr. Chair.
Sir.
Mr. Executive Director, Mark Rentz, Aqua, Association of California Water Agencies. I couldn't let you walk out of the room this easily, Phil.
Okay.
But really, I was waiting for general comments. I think, and we will be submitting more detailed written comments before the deadline this Friday. One of the thoughts I would share with you is when people look at the map that shows the primary and secondary area, it's quite inclusive. And I think my general comment to you would be, as you're going through the first draft, and I'm very appreciative of the fact that you're going for several iterations. I think that's going to make for a much better end product, and that's what we're all looking for, is one that really is one that's well defined in the end and defensible in the end. One of the comment I'd have to you is, if early on in the stages, especially given the two categories of human beings you just described to us, you can give us a sense of, especially in the secondary areas, what kind of actions you'll be looking at, what kind of expectations you have as far as projects that may be affected or have to respond to the plan. I think that might be beneficial for some of the people who don't have the privilege to attend your meetings on a regular basis, the general public. I think possibly that's the reason why you're not getting a lot of response now, is they look at the map and they say, well, is it my project or isn't my project? So that would be my only comment, is any way we can early on in the process kind of educate people as your expectations.
One thing Aqua could do, since you represent, I guess you represent almost virtually all of the water agencies throughout California, give us some advice about how to deal with the flow criteria that we're required to take into account in the Delta Plan. BDCP, of course, is required to take it into account. And, you know, as a practical matter, everyone's in favor of flow criteria as long as it doesn't affect the water they get and use. How do you do that? And I say you're uniquely situated to do that because you have members who are on various sides of that issue.
Oh, I can't believe that at all.
Yeah, and since a balancing test is often the most difficult thing to do, and we have something like a balancing test, it would be useful to see if Aqua could construct in short order kind of an overview similar to what you've done on other issues of troublesome, vexatious issues that affect your members. But there has to be a way to do it because the law, you know, there have been 25 years now attempting to develop updated flow criteria for the Delta without success. The legislation's full of allusions to that, requirements to take them into account, and so on. But as a practical matter, a whole bunch of people would prefer they not be set, and other people would really like them to be set. So what do you think, Mark?
Okay, that's a good challenge.
That would be very helpful, even if it's nothing more than exploring the political process of how you achieve what the law requires to be done, water quality in the Delta, in the face of opposition that is in favor of water quality, but not if they have to adjust their behavior in any way.
That's a good challenge. I will take back. I think we will try. Whether we can get you that by this Friday, I rather doubt.
Oh, I doubt that too. But
I think there's benefit.
With all these iterations we're going to go through with the plan, there's a little time to digest it. But if you could do a 30-day time turnaround on something that complicated, it would be immensely helpful.
We'll take it back and go to work on it. Thank you for your feedback.
Thank you, sir. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Thank
Sorry,
you.
didn't see.
Charlotte Mitchell. I'm with the Sacramento Farm Bureau and part of the 5 Delta County Farm Bureau Delta Caucus. And of course, we'll be submitting our complete written comments at the end of this. But certainly want to reiterate the fact that the Delta is a multi-billion-dollar agriculture industry, and not to lose sight of that as we move forward in this plan. And there's many concerns that we have, and I just want to iterate one of them this morning, and that's the use of eminent domain, the possibility of using eminent domain over the willing seller, willing buyer arrangement, as this plan may include. So again, our complete written comments will be provided at the end of this, and thank you for the opportunity.
I appreciate that. Is your concern about eminent domain restricted to restoration, or is it also floodplain development?
Well, as a plan begins to dictate how we're going to use the Delta in a way to convey water from the north to the south, and ensuring that our farmer members are protected in their operations, and that industry is protected in the utmost viability that it is in providing food and fiber and other commodities throughout the region and the state is most important to us. So ensuring that arrangement is considered willing buyer, willing seller first over the prospect of having it
even over
coordinated.
flood control. That's a more complicated issue.
It
I'm
is
sure
more
you
complicated,
understand.
and again, we'll vent that further in our written comments.
I would appreciate that.
Yes.
That'd be terrific.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, is there anyone else who would like to comment to us on anything generally? Okay, going once, going twice. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you very much.